Okay, so now we're talking about table and figures. Especially for table, I think that's are extremely important because that will catch the interest of the reader at the first reading. I personally, what I do when I see a paper that the title appeals to the interest of me, I will usually go for the abstract, and then I will go for the tables. And just to be sure that there is something really is interesting to my knowledge, and then I will read the paper. So tables are extremely important because give you and summarize the result of your study. Then you can have a look at the figures, but that's a little more descriptive part. So definitely are much more important than people would think. People think, oh, I just put a table because I can summarize my result, but what is interesting is in my paper. I think that the table itself are extremely important. So you want to catch the attention of the reader. You want to give them the important fact and result of your table. Of course, you need to balance. You cannot have 25 pages of written article in one table, but you cannot even have 25 tables in your paper, because will be, and as well as illustration, especially for figures or for pictures of interoperable picture nowadays. Although there is an online summation and most of the paper our journal are going only online, that can be interesting, but picture should be a good quality, high quality, and to obtain those, especially when the area of video surgery is not always the case, and they are very, very disappointing when they are printed out or even online. Table and figures, they have to have certain parts that are extremely important. They have to have a title, they have to have a legend, and if they have abbreviation, as most of the time is the case, they have to have an explanation of the abbreviation either in the text or in the table itself. And you need to choose a good title because you want to capture the attention of the reader, and they need to give you the information of what the table is about, and they have to give you the purpose of the table. You just don't want just to repeat stuff. You just want to catch the attention. And it's important that you put table and figures in a chrono and also in a logical way within the text. So you don't want to never to quote a table before and the table being 3 pages ahead, because that will be misleading for the patient. How you number table figures? Usually most of the journal require to be in a Arabic number, and tables and figures have to be completely independent, one from each other, and they have to be in a chronological sequence within the text. And you need to number the figures or the table, even if you have just one table of figures. You cannot just write recorded and then place figures, because it doesn't mean anything. They have to be recorded. You can actually either use the entire word, like here, table 1, or you can use it as an abbreviation of fig 1. Fig 1 doesn't need really a explanation because it's common knowledge. Otherwise, you give too many information over the reader. You can also say, instead of quoting, in square, you can actually also say as shown in the table. So you can be part of the text, but it had to be chronological and had to be numbered, even if they have one single thing. Where do you place it? You really have to do it in a proper way. The editor will actually do the job, or you can actually, if you want to be sure, you can specify in the cover letter. Okay, the table and the figures should be as close as possible to the text that is referring here. Okay, so for instance, here you can see the table about here. That is an editor comment during the draft review of the paper itself. Usually you should not usually, you have to quote and to mention the figure, the table or the figures into the text before it appears. For instance, here is not good because you can see the table is before it's been quoted. So the reader will come here and then will find out that the explanation or the referring to the table is underneath the table itself. So that is an important thing. You can actually ask when you see the draft, if the draft is not good for your side, you should mention to the editor and they will differentiate. Where do you put the title? Usually for table, the title is on the top, and for the graph is usually on the bottom. And usually the title are always left to right, although some figures or some tables can be also centered, but usually it's better to be left to right. As you can see here, okay? And here is a figure that is centered over here, but probably if it was left to right would be nice. But this is a good picture, and you have the explanation of the picture and the title centered. For the title, you want to have something that catch the attention of the reader and want something that actually give you the idea of what the table or the figures is all about. So be telegraphic, avoid any verbs, okay? Better if they use, if you use a bold style, because actually is give you the idea that this is really a title, and try not to use any abbreviation when you put the legend, because otherwise it would be very difficult to understand what the abbreviation stands for, and then the reader will have to go into the text and recall, and would be very difficult to understand the meaning of the graph of the table. The table should be used when you are either categorical data, frequency, percentage, or metric, nominal, or means. And if you have too many tables or too many data, you can also refer to an online material only. Now, some of the journal, in order to avoid too many tables within the text, they refer to an online material that, since most of us read the paper online, that would be very easy to be identified. You should not use table when you give patient individual details, you know, population size, sex ratio, age, range, and every time you have less than 6 items, you should not put them into the table, but you should discuss and present into the text. You should not use the table when you have relationship data, you know, relation within time or between data themselves. These are better represented in a graph, and you will see some example. And you should not use table when you want to show a trend or a relationship with time, because in this case it's better to use figures or a graph as well. You can indicate, you can use footnotes. Footnotes, you know, you can are often used in tables, but you need to explain the footnotes, of course, and usually you don't put any different style of your fonts. You don't use italics, and definitely you don't use different color in tables, because different color are good when you're presenting the table, the data in a slides, but are not good for the paper, especially when it's printed out, because most of them are not printed out in color. And these are some example of footnotes. Okay, that's how you should use it. Most of the time, this kind of information are given into the instruction of authors. So each journal has got its own preferred footnotes, and you should refer to them. When you put a table, you usually want to put the p-value, when you have explaining some statistical analysis. Where you should put the table? Always at the end of your table, over here. because if you put in between, that would be extremely confusing. And this is the most probably read column of your table, because people want to know if the data that you're analyzing give you some statistically significantly result. So always put at the end of the table. What about dimension and orientation? Portrait versus landscape. You need to remember that that depends on the width of your page and the length of your table, and also the data you are presenting. You should remember when you write a paper, you've made a table, the computer format are in a portrait. The computer is in landscape format, and the printout are in a portrait format. So this is an important factor. The second factor, in fact, if you have too many columns in a landscape, can create a very big problem like this one, and you don't really want to have the head of your reader to be like this one and try to read everything else. This is very annoying. This is not a good table because there are too many data, of course, but it's also difficult to be read, and unless you read those. Some of the journals understood the problem and they modify the landscape of the page, but that's a very little problem, and some of this problem can be solved with the online material, or where you have a digital PDF style that you can rotate, but still this is a little bit annoying for the reader. Do not use Excel or PDF for your table. You can use Word, PowerPoint, TIFF, JPEG, but you really need to refer to the instruction for authors, but Excel and PDF usually are not good. And when you are submitting online, there is more tendency to be a little bit more permissive to the kind of transmission, but you should always refer to the author. You should avoid repetition on your table. Either you use percentage or either you use the number. Here you can see in this kind of table, you see you have the repetition of 428 all the time. And you don't really need to give the fraction, because you can also give the percentage, or you can give the fraction but not the percentage, because it's a kind of repetition. You always try to have a good alignment of your data, because otherwise will be not nice to be seen. So this is an example of good alignment of the data, as you can see here. Nice. And this is again of poor alignment, because everything is difficult to read because the numbers are placed in a different position, and also the percentage are in a different position. So this had to be clarified. Maybe you have a draft and you can ask the editor to correct. When you make a table and you give too many information, that will be useless. The reader will have a look at it, and you have to probably put his glasses on to read it, and it will be very confusing with all these lines, with all these columns. So try to focus on the important message. Look at this. This is not good because it's difficult to follow, and probably they are giving information that are not really interesting for the result and for the topic that you're trying to prove. If you don't have enough space, as I mentioned, you want to split your data in different tables. Maybe the editor will say, well, we cannot put this in a printed version, but you can have this in an online version. And this is quite common now, and it's quite useful because you may be interested in some data in a Word format. Maybe if you want to even have this data for a presentation that you have to present referring to another paper, this can be quite useful. Either you use a chronological order or an alphabetic order, but you need to be consistent through the text and through the design of your table. Here you can see, there is no consistency between the notes and the presentation of here. That should be first, should be WD. Be sure what you're writing. You know, sometimes when you can make mistake or your data are not consistent. This is an example because you're talking about standard deviation, and then this is not a case of something that is normally distributed. So you need to be sure of the content that you're putting in your stuff. In summary, you need to be concise but precise. That is the same of the text. You just saw the Professor Fingerhut description of your medical style. You need to be concise but precise. And in tables, this is even more important because you don't want to give useless information, or you want to focus only in the data that you want to be evident of your study and your paper. You really try to avoid to use multiple abbreviations, otherwise it would be complicated. And if you use a table, you don't have, and this is the most important and is most common mistake, if you put data in the table, you should not put them in the text, or vice versa. If you have a description in the text, you should not put this in the table. The table is to summarize your result, but you refer to the table in the text. But the most common mistake that I see in papers is that an author just describe the result into the text, into the result section, and then say table 1. Table 1 is the same result. This is a waste of space for your paper, and is misleading also for the reader, because you say, well, it may present something different in the table, and that is the same thing. So this is extremely important. Use portrait rather than landscape because it's better for the reader. And avoid to have too many columns and too many rows. There is no maximum in the rows, and you can refer to the instruction of author if the journal give you some information about that. If you want to really highlight a value, that should be done in the text rather than in the table, but you never underline the data of the table, but you can use italics. And use the footnotes to clarify any kind of clarification that you need in the table in order to make it more easy and easier to be understood by the editor. What about figures? Figures are important because figures, and that include graphs, is a visual presentation of your result. Especially when we're talking about the graphs, linear line, bar, or pies, and whatever. And the other figures are, for surgery, usually intraoperative figures, but these are really less important than you may expect. I would avoid any kind of picture that is related to a medical device, because that will look at the eyes of the editor and the reviewer like you're trying to sell a product rather than to show the result of your study. And the other thing that you should avoid is to have too many intraoperative pictures, because as we said, unless it's extremely important to describe a new technology, they have no really much sense, because the quality that they ended up to have would be pure than the one you see in your monitor and your screen. Sometimes they will print it out in black and white unless you pay for a color picture, and that will make no sense for most of the intraoperative picture. The graphs are extremely important to describe your result. This can be, yes, a repetition, because you will describe the result in the text, in the result section, and then you give a visual presentation of your result. Line graphs usually are used for survival, cumulative survival or survival of a study. You need to be sure that you have that the thickness of your line is adequate to be read properly. And if you can use color, knowing that probably in the printed version is not going to be in color anymore. So in cases you need to refer to the editor of the line. You can use this cutting thing if it's a continuous data, but not for all the cases, because here you will see that you have no data over here, and so they can be cut on this level. You should join the line, line joining if if you have a possibility to have an intermediate, but if you have two whole number, as here, that is linear stapler, okay, they have no meaning because you cannot have half. You cannot really have half stapler line to be used. You can say E1, 2, or 3. So there is no point for line joining, or it can be in these cases, that is a different study, but you need to be consistent. As you can see, you have this legend over here referring to this line over here, you have this legend over here referring to this one, and this to this one. So that should be changed, otherwise it's not good. Bar graph or histogram should be used when you would like to compare a single variable among several groups, and they can be used to describe frequency, and this is why I call frequency histogram. And the most important thing is that in the bar you should have a graph that includes 6-8 bar maximum. If you have too many, you lose the point of having and giving a good visual identification of your result. Here you should use color, if it's possible, in order to differentiate the different bar. Visually, it's much better if you have a vertical rather than an horizontal orientation of the bar. And the legend, they should be really visible, otherwise they will get confusing for the reader. This is an example of bar. You can also put in the bar, you can put error bar over there. And this is another view of a nice histogram bar with different color, and you can also add p-value. You need to pay attention when you put the p-value into the graph bar, because they have to be quite clearly, the references to the bar should be nice and evident. If there is any confusion, that may create confusion in the understanding of the result. You can create very fancy 3D histogram bar, but that's rarely accepted by the journal, because then in the printed version, their results are not clearly visible. And pie chart, they're very rarely used today. They should be used when you have 5 to 6 parts. If you have too many parts, it would be very difficult to be understood and very difficult to put the legend. It's better if you create pies that are spread apart. That will give you a better visual explanation to the reader. If they are not in color, or if they are color originally, but then they're printed out, you need to be sure that you are be able to differentiate this, not like this one, that is not as easy to be differentiated. It's really easy here and here, but then they became confusing in this part, and especially for the legend. And sometimes when you have a pie chart, it's better, and the editor usually asks to change it in a table, because the table is give you better information than a part. You can also flow chart when it's needed, especially for randomized control trial, and you want to explain your randomization process and your recruitment process. That is extremely important. And if this is a nice illustration for the administration of chemotherapy regimes, but are different. You can use forest plot. Forest plot are usually used for meta-analysis, but not only for meta-analysis. That will give you a very nice visual information if one is better than the other one, according to the location of the prism of the square, as in these cases. And there are some software that can be used for performing graphs. Once again, do not use Excel for table or for graph, because they will not be accepted by most of the journal. You can use some specific software. You can use Word, but you need to refer to the table to the instruction for authors. And sometimes, even if you write a very nice paper and then you have a very nice result, sometimes you come up with completely useless illustration like this one that are very good, probably for the people that wrote the article, but are totally impossible to read by the author. As I say, do not use Excel to create artwork. Usually, most of the requirement for the journal are GIF figures or TIFF for if you're using a Macintosh. What about electronic image? Well, sometimes just picture, interoperative picture or drawing. Well, they're more used now because of the electronic version of the magazine. So they have to be high quality, very high resolution for color and for interoperative picture. This is an example. They have to have probably legend like this one, and they have to have a good explanation. Color is much better, especially if you're talking about histological image. When you are actually black and white for an histologic image is totally useless. Better not to put anything inside. You can have illustration that can be drawn professionally. Professional drawing are most of the journal require that, but are expensive. As you can see here, even a simple one had to be in the right size and had to be in the right quality of the image to be published. There are now websites that provide you illustration service. Some of them are free, some of them are to be paid, and most of the time had to be paid by the author. And I thank you very much for it.